TCF has taken has been four parts, right? One is, what they call the sustain the community, right? And there are two aspects to that. One is supporting the community, and the thing that TCF does is it recognizes that education is part of a system, the community, system, the family, and so on and so forth, right? So what they're doing is they're going out of their way to make sure that the families of the students are okay, in terms of humanitarian support, in terms of providing masks and PPE and so on and so forth. Right? To the best of my understanding, they have not let one employee go. Right? That is absolutely remarkable, right? And we'll come back to the values of the institution, and this is where values matter when it's difficult to live up to them. And when it would have been so easy to cut costs, right? The management took a very bold step and said, our people, they're what make us happen, right? And therefore we have to stand up for them. And so getting behind the teachers, right? So that's what TCF has done in terms of sustain. The second part is what they call engage, right? And they've produced a really interesting, for instance, an interesting set of television programs called Inka Angan, right? And you should go watch it. It's really very entertaining. It is very, a kid will really enjoy watching it. I found myself watching it more than, so I guess the inner kid in me found it quite entertaining. But, it's joyful. I mean, it is what you would see in a very well produced commercial education program on TV, right? And so it focuses on everything from, how do you deal with being in a lockdown? So, for instance, I believe one of the very first lessons is, let's do some exercise, right? Let's just loosen up, right? And so that, plus it's got sort of cartoon characters. Again, the whole atmosphere is very joyful while imparting lessons, right? And again, you don't see that anywhere. I mean, even in wealthy countries, no one's bothered. I mean, the people point them to, fortunately, thanks to Salman Khan and Khan Academy, fortunately there's a good repository of videos, but very few institutions have actually gone out of the way to produce something. Now, the value of producing something like this is it's available to everybody, right? In addition to that, they've also done a print version of stuff that they go drop off periodically, and this also is something that's available to non TCF students. And if I'm not mistaken, a large number of other schools serving low income communities are subscribing to that as well. The third big thing is around actually even before schools reopen. If I'm not mistaken, they've also been doing some sort of small group education where teachers show up to community settings, appropriately distanced and masked, and so on and so forth. And so they are going out of their way, instead of asking the students to come to the school, actually going to the community settings, right, on their own volition. Right, taking, obviously they're taking appropriate precautions, but it is difficult for a teacher to take on that risk of contracting the disease, right? And again, shows the value of the TCF, the values of the TCF staff. So the third big pillar is reopening, right? So, if in a lot of low-income countries, essentially the governments tend to give some loose guidelines and they tell the schools, do what you want to do, right? There's not going to be any enforcement. But again, if you look at the way TCF has actually very methodically outlined what's the do's and the don'ts, consulted with the WHO guidelines, and whatever ministerial guidelines there are improved on them. And as the schools reopen, actually putting in place those best practices. Again, truth be told, school systems in wealthy countries can learn from that, right? And the last thing is a bucket that TCF calls support. It is an incredibly difficult time for everybody, and teachers have to deal with the fact that they have to take on the burden of educating the kids under these very difficult circumstances. Many of them have their own kids who may or may not be able to go to school, right? So they have to worry about that. They have to worry about their health, and to support with all that, TCF's actually invested in emotional well-being, social well-being, content and sort of and events for students and teachers alike.